Do you ever feel that your sewing is more a comedy of errors than a fashion show? Well, you're not alone. In today's video, I'm sharing toxic sewing traits. I'm going to share my own sewing sins with you, and I think you're going to find them relatable. Let me know in the comments down below if you do any of these things. Just before we get into the meat of the video, if we're just meeting, my name is Claire. I've been a dressmaker for about 12 years on and off. And I've run this channel for 6 years, so I've got lots of videos in my archive for you to binge watch. So before we get into it, hit subscribe somewhere down here and like the video, because that's going to really help the algorithm to share it out to more people. I think you're really going to like this one. Don't forget to follow me over on Instagram as well. Right, that's enough rambling, let's get into it. I guess for me, a toxic sewing trait is something, a habit that I do in sewing that is not technically the right way to do it. It's a shortcut, it's a hack. If a professional saw me, they would gasp in horror. And as I teach sewing on this channel, it's a little bit of a vulnerable moment to sit here and tell you these. So the first one is ignoring notches. So this is when you've got your pattern piece out and you are tracing around or cutting around your pattern piece. There are notches on the pattern, on the edge, on the seam line of the fabric. And the reason for that is that you align the notches on the two pieces of fabric, and that ensures that you're going to sew them correctly. As a newbie to sewing, I highly recommend that you do this all the time. But as you get into sewing, it becomes one of those things, certainly for me, where it's an unnecessary extra. Because I know how to sew clothes, I just think, oh, I'm going to just wing it, it'll be fine, And invariably it's not, actually. When we don't add notches, our construction will suffer. And when I say the construction will suffer, it means that if you're not using notches, you may be sewing it wrong. For example, if you've got a long seam and you're putting it through the sewing machine, you're just winging it, you're not using notches, then what can invariably happen, and often happened to me, was that by the time I got to the end of the seam, I might have an inch or so longer on one of the sides, and that means the fabric is stretched out, or I have just not sewn it correctly. Whereas if I'd used notches, and you get 2 or 3 notches along a seam line, I could see any problem coming up as it was happening, rather than waiting to the end, having to get the seam ripper out, risk ripping the fabric, and it's just going to speed up your time for sewing as well. I know we like to do garments as quickly as humanly possible. Do you like the different settings? I'm in my lounge today. I was getting a bit fed up with sitting on the bed to film. Let me know what you think. The next toxic sewing trait that I do, that I'm going to share with you, is I don't read instructions. When I was very first sewing, obviously I would read the instructions because I didn't know what I was doing. But once you've sewn 3 or 4 of the same type of garments, so say a shirt, as I'm wearing. No, I didn't make this. This is shop bought. When you make a shirt 4 or 5 times, you're going to know how to make a shirt. You're not going to need to refer to the instructions. I didn't have time for reading instructions. That was too boring for me. But problems did arise out of that. So I do not recommend that you follow suit, because your garments will suffer. So I think you should read through the instructions before you even attempt the garment, a day or 2 before, and let that absorb into your mind. And then as you're making the garment, read each step as you go along. You're going to then know what the designer intended for you to do. And by following what the designer intended, you are going to have the best made garment possible, because they have designed the garment. They know how it is intended to be made, and they might also have some techniques or ways of doing techniques that you haven't considered before, or that you haven't actually done. And by reading the instructions, you're educating yourself, you're learning, you're upskilling your skills essentially. So another thing reading instructions is going to do is going to stop you making mistakes and taking longer to make the garment. So if we just whiz through it without stopping to look at what we're supposed to be doing, we might miss steps out, we might do something the way we think it's intended to do, and it doesn't work. So then we have to seam rip, and we might seam rip 2 or 3 times, really risking the integrity of the fabric. And then we're getting frustrated and we've had enough and we don't want to ever sew again. And then we take a break and we come back to it. And what happens is we then read the instructions and we're like, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it. I've had that conversation with myself so many times. As I am making clothes, and I'm making the Miette skirt by Tilly and the Buttons at the moment, I am going through and I'm reading. It's the most basic pattern, but I'm still reading the instructions. Number one, because I haven't sewn for a couple of years and I need a refresh. So if that's you, definitely read them. But also, I just want to see what she intended, the designer intended for me to do, and then I can make up my own mind about which way I want to go. If you're enjoying this video so far, will you consider subscribing, commenting and liking? Share the video out to anyone you feel would benefit from it. So if you would so like to, I would much appreciate a coffee or a little tip down below. All the links will be there. This next one is one that I do, or used to do, quite a lot, and I think some of you do it too. Do let me know down in the comments below. Picking the size that I think I am in ready to wear, not the size that the measurements dictate. So let's unpack that for a minute. So when we look at a sewing pattern, there's a lot of sizes on the back, and they usually go from 0 up to about 32, something like that. And under each size is measurements that are allocated to that size. We should be going to those measurements, taking our measurements. Take your measurements before every single project, because us women, we fluctuate. Even if you're a man, I really think it's beneficial to take your measurements every single time. So you've got your measurements. What you should be doing is go into your chart, looking for the measurements that align closest to yours, and then sewing that size. Now the problem, the emotional, the egotistical problem that we have when we do this is we might look at the size and it's 3 sizes bigger than our ready to wear size. Because our brain loves familiarity and we judge ourselves so harshly, especially women, on the size of clothes that we wear. If you're a size 12 in the shops, but you're a size 18 in the pattern that you're making, that can initiate all sorts of negative feelings within ourselves, and we might actually be quite offended at the pattern for telling us that we are 3 sizes bigger. When that happens, we want to rescue our own egos, and we're like, no, I know, pattern's got to be wrong. I can't be wrong. The pattern's got to be wrong. So what happens is I'm like, I know I'm a size 12, so I'm going to sew a size 12. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. So you sew a size 12 and the thing doesn't fit you because you should have sewn 3 sizes bigger. And I certainly did that right at the beginning of my sewing journey, but I did learn quite quickly. And actually I had to do a bit of work. I remember the very first time I looked at a pattern, it was a Tilly and the Buttons Bettine dress. And I looked at the measurements and it didn't fit on the thing. My size was not actually there, and it made me feel so bad about myself. And this is why I campaign so hard for plus sizes to be incorporated into sewing patterns, and I'm so glad they are. Because when I was at my largest, I was in a size 24 in sewing patterns. And so I had to do quite a lot of emotional work within myself. I had to deep dive into why I was feeling these feelings and work with myself to overcome them so that I could actually sew clothes that fit me. I would say for the first 18 months that I was sewing clothes just in a regular size, like size 10 or whatever, knowing full well they wouldn't fit me. My emotional state was that I could not face sewing something for myself because it was going to be so big. It was so confrontational for me. I'd recently put on a lot of weight and I wasn't facing up to it. I did the work for myself and I accepted myself for who I was, and I started to make clothes. I was on YouTube and I had to make clothes for myself to show you guys. So I worked past it. My advice to you, if you're a new sewer, always go by your measurements. No one else is going to know what size you are, only you. You've got to stop judging yourself, basically. So whatever size you need in order to have a well-fitting garment, because that is going to make you look more slimmer than a garment that's too tight. What you have to remember is each pattern company and shop will have their own size measurements. So you might be a 12 in one place and a 16 in the other anyway. So you just can't get away from that. My next toxic sewing trait is picking patterns that look good on skinny models. Now, I posted about this in my community tab and someone's come to me and said that they felt sad about that, and then lectured me about how skinny is not any better than fat, or that person completely missed my point. So the fact is, when you have different body shapes and sizes, different outfits are going to either suit you or not suit you. For example, when I was at my biggest, if I'd made a bodycon dress, it wasn't going to suit me no matter what. And that's not about whether skinny people are better than fat people. Not at all. And that's not something I subscribe to, and it's certainly not something that I want to put out to you guys. However, if I'm at my biggest, a size 24, making a really tight jersey dress that looks amazing on Lisa Comfort, I am deluded if I think that that is going to look good on me. And that's why when all the pattern designers started including larger sizes, suddenly all the designs become big and baggy and voluminous. They are then creating patterns that appeal to everyone, and they are aware that you cannot have a super slim fitting pattern for the bigger sizes. Well, you can, but it's not going to appeal to the masses. And that's where I stand on that. I've got like 150 PDF patterns that I've just never sewn. The amount of money I've wasted on this, it was either patterns where they don't actually go up to my size and I lied to myself to tell myself that I would grade it up, or they did go up to my size and they just didn't suit me. So the issue is when we look at these patterns, the person on the pattern looks amazing, absolutely amazing. And that makes us feel good things when we look at people that look good. We think, if I buy that pattern, I too will look like that. And it's just not the case. And that's not to say that you look worse than them, you're just going to look different. There's loads of videos on YouTube talking about which styles to choose based on your body shape. You can look that up if you want to. But that is a real thing, whether we like it or not. I think the real problem comes when we do not know our own style and what suits us. So we see these patterns they're released. The marketing around the patterns is amazing. We've got the FOMO. And we're like, we want it, we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And not knowing your style is going to make you waste money. So I would really recommend that you look in to working out what your style is, and I may do some videos on that because it's something that I need to do again, because when I was bigger I used to love wearing tunic dresses with leggings. That was my go-to. I could still wear that if I want, but I don't think it suits my figure that I have now. So I'm trying out lots of different things, and I do need to go shopping and try some different garments on just to get an idea of what suits me. But let me know if you want some videos on that. But even if I don't do any videos specifically on that, then I do recommend you understand your style, what suits you, before you purchase any more patterns, because otherwise you are going to have the toxic sewing trait that I had, which was to just buy patterns willy-nilly because you liked how they looked. It's not good, guys. It's not good. That's all the toxic sewing traits I'm sharing with you today. There are many, many, many more. So if the video does well, we may do another one at some point. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want a video that's kind of similar, check out this sewing myths video. A little bit different, but not a million miles away. I think you're going to love it.